Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Tuesday, January 28th, 2025. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today: hundreds of thousands of Palestinians return to North Gaza. So Palestinians who were displaced from northern Gaza in the early days of Israel's genocidal war on the Strip began returning to the ruins of their homes on Monday as part of the ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas. So despite the massive destruction in northern Gaza, the health ministry estimates around 650,000 Palestinians will return. Later on Monday, Gaza's media office said that 300,000 Palestinians had returned on Monday. So the pictures coming out of Gaza, really something to see. Huge crowds of Palestinians. Look at this picture we have here, just walking into the ruins of northern Gaza. They passed through the Netzarim corridor, which was that strip of land that the Israeli military controls and where they demolished all the buildings and built military bases. But the Palestinians went through there and returned again to the ruins of their homes, to the rubble of their homes. So the Israeli military first ordered the evacuation of North Gaza in October 2023, when it was estimated that the area was home to about 1.1 million people. Most Palestinians forced from the north had been displaced multiple times over the past 15 months and had been living in tent camps in southern and central Gaza. Many returning to the north will go on living in tents near the rubble of their homes. Fadi, who's a North Gaza resident that spoke with Middle East Eye, said, quote, "We have spent around 1 year and 3 months resilient in the Gaza Strip. We did not need anything from the world. We only had God with us," end quote. Some Palestinians said that the return to the north was a message to President Trump, who recently suggested the idea of cleaning out Palestinians from Gaza and sending them to Egypt and Jordan, an idea that's been strongly rejected by the neighboring Arab states. Rashid Khalidi, a Gaza resident, told the New Arab, quote, "Proposals like Trump's ignore the deep ties and sacrifices that bind people to their homes. These are not just houses, they are symbols of identity and resistance," end quote. So Palestinians were able to return to the north as part of a deal that was brokered by Qatar that will see the release of an Israeli female civilian hostage and 2 other captives on Thursday. Hamas said that the return to the north was a victory for Palestinians and a setback for Israel. So starting in October 2024, so just to make clear, when we're talking about North Gaza in this context, this includes all the areas to the north of the Netzarim corridor, which includes Gaza City, and the cities to the north of Gaza City, which we've talked about a lot over the past few months: Beit Lahia, Beit Hanun, and Jabalia. This is where Israel, starting in October 2024, really ramped things up as part of this ethnic cleansing campaign known as the General's Plan. And the idea here was they ordered evacuation of these cities, and any Palestinian civilians left there, were told to leave under the threat of death, either by military action or starvation. They imposed a total siege on these cities, and they demolished nearly every building there. I mean, these cities are just completely destroyed. And many Israeli officials and settlers, the idea was that this would be a ethnic cleansing campaign to make way for the establishment of Jewish settlements. So this is a major blow to these plans. The fact that these Palestinians, so many of them, even though there's this mass destruction, are willing to go back to North Gaza. And I mean, it really goes to show how this idea that, that Trump floated out, there's going to be so much resistance to that. And actually, the General Island, who is the retired IDF general who devised this ethnic cleansing plan for North Gaza, known as the General's Plan, he, expressed his disappointment that these Palestinians were able to return, saying that it was a failure of Israel's war goals. And he said that Israel was now at the mercy of Hamas. So it was just really something to see all these pictures and videos out of Gaza today. All right, so the next one here, Israeli forces kill 5-year-old in central Gaza. So Israeli shelling near the Nusret refugee camp in central Gaza killed a 5-year-old Palestinian girl on Monday, despite the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, the Palestinian news agency Wafa reported. So the girl, Nadia al-Amoudi, was killed and 3 others were wounded when Israeli forces struck an animal-drawn cart that was among the crowd of Palestinians returning to northern Gaza. So I assume that means, the report said it was an animal-drawn cart. I assume that means a cart that was being pulled by a donkey. That seems to be the most common form of animal transportation that we see in Gaza. So that's who the Israeli military bombed. And again, they killed a 5-year-old girl. And then the Israeli military put out a statement claiming that its aircraft fired on a group of Palestinians that posed a threat to IDF troops. The military said, quote, in central Gaza, an Israeli military aircraft fired to distance several suspicious vehicles that were moving northward in an area that is not authorized for passage according to the agreement, end quote. So one of those vehicles was a cart being pulled by a donkey. And then later on Monday, Wafa reported that another Palestinian civilian was killed near the Nusret refugee camp by an Israeli strike while he was operating a bulldozer. And according to eyewitnesses, the Israeli aircraft hit a bulldozer west of the Nusret camp, which was attempting to free a vehicle trapped in the area. The airstrike resulted in the killing of the driver and the injury of several others. So Israeli ceasefire violations continue. And also on Monday, Gaza's health ministry said that it received 11 more bodies over the previous 24-hour period, including 9 that were dug out of the rubble and 2 that were killed in the previous 24-hour period. And this was, I believe, before both of these, the 5-year-old girl being killed and the guy driving the bulldozer being killed. So these were 2 other Palestinians killed on top of that. And it does seem about every day there's been 1 or 2 Palestinians killed by Israeli fire in Gaza. So this Gaza death toll will continue to climb as they recover bodies from the rubble. And, you know, we see these incidents happening just about every day. And Israel always claiming, oh, you know, there was a threat that we responded to. All right, so the next one here, Smotrich says he's working to enact Trump's idea to clean out Gaza. So Israeli Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich said that he's working to make President Trump's suggestion that Palestinians could be cleaned out of Gaza and moved to Egypt and Jordan a reality. So Trump's idea sparked a backlash from Arab nations, including Egypt and Jordan, who said they strongly oppose the ethnic cleansing of Gaza. Smotrich downplayed their response and called it weak opposition. Speaking to reporters ahead of a meeting of his religious Zionism party, Smotrich told reporters that he's working with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on an operational plan to implement Trump's proposal. He said, quote, I am working with the Prime Minister and the cabinet to prepare an operational plan to ensure the realization of President Trump's vision. There is nothing to be excited about the weak opposition of Egypt and Jordan to the plan. We saw yesterday how Trump imposed his will on Colombia to deport immigrants despite its opposition. When he wants it, it happens, end quote. And he's talking about that spat between Trump and Colombia's president. And so actually, that reminds me, I went over that story yesterday on the show. And then right after I uploaded everything, news came out about that, that the White House said that Colombia's agreed to all their demands about sending migrants back to Colombia. And so they're not imposing the sanctions or the tariffs, but they are keeping the visa restrictions until they're satisfied with what Colombia is doing here. So that was something that we updated on the page. But so anyway, but back to the situation with Smotrich here. So Smotrich claimed that there is, quote, no doubt that in the long term, encouraging immigration is the only solution that will bring peace and security to the residents of Israel and also ease the suffering of the Arab residents of Gaza, end quote. Smotrich has been threatening that his religious Zionism party will quit Netanyahu's government if military operations in Gaza are not restarted after the 42-day first phase of the ceasefire deal. So again, this return that we see in North Gaza is makes this plan, what Smotrich wants in Gaza, less likely. The fact that the Palestinians are going back there in such, in mass, in such large groups. All right, so the next one here, Hamas recruited 15,000 fighters since the Israeli invasion of Gaza, and this is according to the U.S. intelligence. This article is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. So one of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's top goals for Israel's onslaught in Gaza is to eliminate Hamas. U.S. intelligence now says Tel Aviv may not have made any progress in achieving that goal, as Hamas has added 15,000 new fighters since the Israeli Defense Forces began military operations in the Strip. According to congressional sources who were briefed on the situation by the intelligence community, Hamas has recruited 10,000 to 15,000 new fighters over the past 15 months. During that period, U.S. intelligence also believes Israel killed about the same number of Hamas fighters, 10,000 to 15,000, which is less than the 20,000 that Israel claims. And Kyle points out that this means that the U.S. estimates of Hamas fighters being killed, which we don't know if these numbers are right, but if they are, that means that Israel killed more children in Gaza than Hamas fighters. Israel has killed approximately 17,000 according to the confirmed deaths. This is from November. I believe that was when they said the death toll was around 46,000, which of course we know that the health ministry's death toll is an undercount, doesn't include all the bodies under the rubble. And Blinken, Secretary of State Antony Blinken, made a similar statement about the Hamas fighters, basically saying that U.S. intelligence believes that Hamas has recruited almost as many new militants as it has lost. And that's what happens when you kill so many civilians. I mean, you can't imagine, you try to put yourself in the shoes of the Palestinians. If you're just a, ordinary guy living in Gaza, you're not involved in any politics or anything. You're not a member of Hamas, not even a supporter of Hamas, but an Israeli bomb comes into your living room and kills your whole family. What are you going to do in that situation? So this is, not a surprise to see, but it just goes to show how despite the destruction, despite the slaughter of so many women and children and civilian men, they haven't come close to achieving this goal of eliminating Hamas. All right, so the next one here, former Israeli defense minister wants more troops in Lebanon. This article is from Jason Ditz. So in Lebanon, the situation is they're saying that the deadline for the Israeli withdrawal has extended to February 18th. That's what the U.S. said. They say Lebanon has agreed. Israel is still prohibiting civilians from returning to their homes in southern Gaza. Many were massacred on Sunday. There was more gunfire against people trying to return to their homes on Monday. I believe 2 were killed in that. And now we're seeing ideas floated by Benny Gantz, who's essentially an opposition leader now since he quit the war cabinet, Netanyahu's war cabinet. But he's calling for further escalation of the ceasefire. Jason calls it the ceasefire occupation because it's not really a ceasefire. Israel's been continuing to fire. They're continuing to occupy southern Lebanon. Basically, Gantz is saying that Israel should send more troops into southern Lebanon and potentially take more villages. And this is, so far, Hezbollah there hasn't been any big response from Hezbollah. No Hezbollah attacks on the Israeli troops. But it seems almost like, I don't know how influential Gantz is at the moment, but I'm sure other Israeli officials are thinking this. If they send more Israeli troops in, it could just be an attempt to provoke Hezbollah to get an excuse to restart this thing. The reports say that Trump was apparently hesitant to agree to this extension of the Israeli occupation of southern Lebanon. Don't know how true that is, but I think it's possible that if Trump or his envoy Steve Witkoff don't want the Lebanon war to restart, that might mean Israel could be looking for a way to kind of provoke some Hezbollah attacks that they could use as the excuse to stay in Lebanon and restart this war. All right, so the next one here, Syria, HTS forces conduct dozens of sectarian executions. This article is from The Cradle. So Syria's government forces executed 5 Alawites in the countryside of the central government of Hamas on January 27th and dozens of others in the past few days, according to the director of the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights. The director, Rami Abdul Rahman, told Al Hurra TV in an interview on Monday that 35 people were executed in the field during the past few days, and today 5 others from the Alawite sect were executed by an armed group in the northern Hama countryside. Their perpetrators belong to groups under the command of the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham-led military operations department, which has been waging an indiscriminate crackdown on elements of the former Syrian Arab army since the new government came to power last week. Abdul Rahman said, quote, "These militants are loose and undisciplined groups that operate under the operations department, and HTS may not be able to control them," end quote. So this has been, very common here, and it just doesn't seem like this is getting any attention from kind of the mainstream Western coverage of the situation in Syria. You see a lot of talk about the EU warming up to this new HTS-led government. And, this Al-Qaeda, this is group that's an offshoot of Al-Qaeda that's still designated by the U.S. as a terrorist organization, but that hasn't stopped the U.S. from supporting them, at least under the Biden administration, providing intelligence, helping with the takeover of Syria. All right, so the next one here, Budanov says talks are needed for Ukraine's existence. So this is an interesting story. Kirilo Budanov, the head of Ukraine's military intelligence, has warned that if negotiations to end the war with Russia did not begin by this summer, Ukraine's very existence will be threatened. According to a report from Ukrainska Pravda, Budanov issued the warning during a closed-door meeting of Ukraine's parliament. A source who attended the meeting told the media outlet that Budanov was asked how much time Ukraine has to fight, and he replied, quote, "If there are no serious negotiations by the summer, dangerous processes could unfold, threatening Ukraine's very existence," end quote. Describing the response to Budanov's comments, the source said, quote, "Everybody exchanged uneasy glances and fell silent. It seems like everything depends on things going right," end quote. So Budanov's comments come as the new Trump administration has declared that its official policy is to seek the end of the war in Ukraine, but so far there's been no sign that negotiations have actually started. And in the meantime, Zelensky's floating these ideas that are just complete non-starters for Russia, including this idea of 200,000 Western troops being deployed to Ukraine to, as peacekeepers to enforce the ceasefire. Russia's never going to go for that. And Budanov's comments reinforce the fact that time is on Russia's side right now. They're continuing to make gains in eastern Ukraine. And really the big issue for Ukraine is the manpower issues. So they're not going to settle for any deal that doesn't address its core demands, which include Ukrainian neutrality, a pledge not to join NATO, and also now to continue to control these territories that they've captured in eastern and southern Ukraine. Russia's not going to give that up now. So there needs to be real negotiations, real concessions made to end this war. And I'm not seeing signs that Ukraine or even the U.S. are really willing to make those right now. So, but Budanov, I mean, this guy, he's the head of Ukraine's military intelligence. He brags about carrying out assassinations and covert attacks inside Russia. He's not afraid to, poke the bear. And, he's even said they've made assassinations attempts against Putin. And here he's saying, we got to end this thing, basically, or we're in real trouble. All right, so the next one here, Russia says that it has not received a request for Putin-Trump talks. So the Kremlin said Monday that Russia is ready for contact between Russian President Vladimir Putin and President Trump, but has not received any requests for such talks from the new administration. So this is Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov. He said, quote, "We haven't received any signals from the Americans yet. This is why we continue working according to schedule, maintaining readiness for dialogue," end quote. So Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov made similar comments, saying the only contacts between the U.S. and Russia are being carried out at the embassy level. So on the campaign trail, Trump pledged to end the war in Ukraine within 24 hours, but the fighting continues, and now the word is he's given his envoy, Keith Kellogg, 100 days to end this thing. But just the fact that there's no sign of talks, of negotiations happening is really not good. Every day this thing drags out is more people dead. And of course, I think, the risk of a U.S.-Russia direct war has gone down. But still, I mean, this thing needs to end, and there needs to be some serious diplomacy and negotiations happening. All right, so the next one here, Trump wants to pull 20,000 troops out of Europe. So President Trump wants to withdraw about 20,000 U.S. troops from Europe, the Italian news agency ANSA reported last week. The U.S. currently has about 100,000 troops deployed across Europe, a result of the Biden administration beefing up the U.S. presence on the continent, which began around the time of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Biden brought the number of troops in Europe to its highest level since 2005. So he really sent a lot of additional troops to Europe. And this report, which cited a European diplomat, said that Trump wants to reduce the military presence in Europe by 20% and would like European countries hosting U.S. troops to pay more for the U.S. presence. The diplomat said, quote, furthermore, for those who remain, he would like a financial contribution from European countries because these soldiers are a deterrent and the costs cannot be borne only by American taxpayers, end quote. So during his previous term in office, if you remember, Trump planned to pull about 10,000 U.S. troops, to be more exact, 9,500 troops out of Germany as part of his efforts to pressure the U.S.'s European allies to pay more for their military. But that withdrawal was never carried out, and the plan was reversed by the Biden administration. So before his inauguration, Trump suggested that NATO countries should increase military spending to 5% of their gross domestic product, their GDP, which is significantly higher than the alliance's 2% GDP goal. So this is kind of Trump's MO, trying to get the pressure of the Europeans to, foot the bill more essentially for their defense. I would like to see a lot more than 20% of the U.S. troops in Germany brought home. I think we could bump it up to 100%. But I think even any troop reductions would be good because it's kind of another thing. Because a lot of these troops went to Eastern Europe, went near Russia, the borders of Russia and Ukraine. So I think it would be good to draw that back. That would help ease tensions. All right, so the next one here, Switzerland deports electronic intifada's Ali Abunimah. So Ali Abunimah is free, but he did not have a good go of it in Switzerland. This is a really should be much bigger of a scandal here that essentially a journalist was arrested in Switzerland for his views. Clearly, the reason why he was targeted was for his views on Israel, his criticism of Israel. So the Electronic Intifada's executive director, Ali Abunimah, was deported by Switzerland on Monday after spending 2 nights in jail. Abunimah described his experience in a statement that he made upon arrival to the Istanbul airport late Monday. He said that he was cut off from communication with the outside world and not even permitted to contact his family. He said the police accused him of offending against Swiss law, but he was not presented with any charges. Abunimah added that he was questioned by Swiss Defense Military Intelligence agents without the presence of his lawyer, and they again refused to allow him to contact his lawyer or his family. Abunimah refused food and accepted only water during his detention until he was informed that he would be going home. This was his. He put out a long post on X when he arrived in Istanbul. He contrasted his ill treatment by Swiss authorities with that of Israeli President Isaac Herzog, who he said, quote, received a red carpet welcome in Davos, a carpet soaked in the blood of Palestinians, end quote. So that is I didn't even think of that. Herzog, the Israeli president, just was in Switzerland for the World Economic Forum, and they rolled out the red carpet for him. But here you have a journalist critical of Israel's slaughter in Gaza, and he gets thrown in jail, and he's not told why, no contact with lawyer or families. Again, you just think this would be a bigger of a deal than it is. And he arrived in Switzerland for a series of events. He was going to speak at these events, And when he arrived at the airport in Zurich on Friday, Abunimah was questioned by police for an hour before being allowed to enter the country. Eyewitnesses said that 3 plainclothes police officers violently arrested Abunimah on Saturday and forced him into an unmarked vehicle without disclosing where he was being taken. And his arrest appears to be part of a growing backlash from Western governments against expressions of solidarity with the Palestinian people. So, just not good. Good that he's free, but just not a good sign of things to come. All right, so the last story here: federal court rules that searches of 702 data is unconstitutional. All right, so this article is from the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and this is good news. So a federal district court held that backdoor searches of databases full of Americans' private communications collected under Section 702 of FISA ordinarily require a warrant. The landmark ruling comes in a criminal case, United States versus Bajrami, after more than a decade of litigation and over 4 years since the Second Circuit Court of Appeals found that backdoor searches constitute separate Fourth Amendment events and directed the district court to determine that a warrant was required. Now that has been officially decreed. In the intervening years, Congress has reauthorized Section 702 multiple times, each ignoring overwhelming evidence that the FBI and the intelligence community abuse their access to databases of warrantlessly collected messages and other data. The Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, which Congress assigned with the primary role of judicial oversight of Section 702, has also repeatedly dismissed arguments that the backdoor searches violate the Fourth Amendment, giving the intelligence community endless do-overs despite its repeated transgressions of even lax safeguards on these searches. The decision sheds the light on the government's liberal use of what is essential a finder's keeper's rule regarding your communication data. Basically, if they have it, they'll use it and abuse it. As a legal authority, FISA Section 702 allows the intelligence community to collect a massive amount of communication data from overseas in the name of national security. But in cases where one side of that conversation is a person on U.S. soil, that data is still collected and retained in large databases searchable by federal law enforcement. Because the U.S. side of these communications is already collected and just sitting there, the government has claimed that law enforcement agencies do not need a warrant to sift through them. EFF argued for over a decade that this is unconstitutional, and now a federal court agrees with us. So again, this is good news, and I mean, it goes to show the fact that they just go through this database essentially whenever they want. Goes to show how we just have no privacy when it comes to our, data, and it's always good, I think, to keep that in mind. So hopefully this means that the federal government needs to change these laws, and so in light of this ruling, EFF asks Congress to uphold its responsibility to protect civil rights and civil liberties by refusing to renew Section 702 absent a number of necessary reforms, including an official warrant requirement for querying U.S. persons' data and increased transparency. On April 15th, 2026, Section 702 is set to expire. So hopefully it dies then or earlier. I think anybody in Congress now should try to get this killed now, especially with this federal ruling. All right, so that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our viewpoints. One from Scott Horton, How Washington Helps, Bloody Lessons from Ukraine to Bosnia, an excerpt from his great book, Provoked, that you should all go buy. Also, if you go to I believe it's scotthorton.com, he has put out the first chapter of the audiobook. He's releasing it as a podcast series. You could subscribe to get that. So if you haven't read the book or you would prefer to listen, definitely go get that. Another viewpoint from Ted Galen Carpenter, Will there be a Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine? One from Dan Steinbach, Trump 2.0 and Palestinians from reversal to repression and deportations. One from Joseph Solis Mullen, America's Origins of Russophobia. And our spotlight is from Stavrula Papst, Once Ridiculed Space Force Ready to Blast Off with Trump. So please go check all of that out. That's everything for me for today. You could always support this show by liking, subscribing, commenting, sharing the show, follow us on social media, and all that good stuff that I always say. I will be back tomorrow with some more news. Thanks for listening.